something down there.
I see dead people.
I'll be back.
I was way off.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
They don't make the movie.
The movie ends, and I remember going, either that's the most brilliant movie ever, or we're so frickin' effed.
But they can make or break it.
The trailer was great. When they saw it, they realized that the movie was going to be great.
From DG Entertainment and Clio Entertainment.
I'll tell you the dark but funny truth about the whole thing.
Trailer geeks and teaser gods.
Oh, this is amazing. I can't believe people get paid to do this.
The fate of the movies is in their hands.
This episode is brought to you by Make It Universal and Rotten Tomatoes presents Seen on the Screen, a bi-weekly podcast that takes listeners behind the scenes at NBC Universal, offering an intimate look at how film and storytelling have impacted the lives of its employees and creative community. Hosted by Jacqueline Coley, journalist and awards editor at Rotten Tomatoes, the series is home to vibrant conversations blending humor, introspection, and unforgettable anecdotes, and a bit of trivia. Jacqueline sets the tone for the show. As an established authority in entertainment, she brings warmth, curiosity, and insight into every episode, exploring film's ability to connect and transform. Make It Universal and Rotten Tomatoes presents Seen on the Screen is available to you on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'm really excited about this episode. Today we have Barbara Glazer, who is widely respected as the queen of trailers. She would never refer to herself that way, but we all do. Barbara first came to prominence as a trailer editor at Tony Silver Films, where she cut the trailer for Platoon, Oliver Stone's award-winning film. And over a short period of time, Barbara worked her way up as a producer and ultimately a partner in what became Silver Glazer Films. And Barbara's best known in the trailer world as the co-founder and co-CEO of the Ant Farm, one of the most successful entertainment marketing firms in the history of the business. They worked on such campaigns as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Sixth Sense, Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy, Pearl Harbor, Sideways, and so many more. And in the year 2000, Barbara co-founded Picturehead, what was initially a leading post-production company that specialized in high-end quality post for short-form marketing materials. And then over the years, it's grown and expanded with Formosa Sound and Picture Shop, which now they collectively work in all areas and formats of post-production. Barbara's also a member of the Academy. She continues to consult as a creative exec at various Hollywood studios, and in closest to her heart is her work as board chair for the nonprofit organization A Place Called Home, which we'll hear more about later in the episode. Now, our conversation with Barbara. So we are with Barbara Glazer, the founder of the Ant Farm and Picturehead, creative director of such campaigns as Lord of the Rings, Sixth Sense, Something's Got to Give, and probably hundreds of other campaigns that we all know and love.
Yeah, and probably lots that you don't love also.
That's the lipstick on a pig section.
Right. I just want to add that I was a co-founder of the Ant Farm.
Co-founder, right, with Mike.
Exactly, with Mike Greenfeld.
Yeah. In your office, the Fairfax office, you had a picture of, I think it was you, in a grocery store?
No, a restaurant.
At a restaurant.
In a Polish coffee shop in the East Village in the 80s when I was in college.
Okay. Why did you keep that picture with you?
I kept that picture so that every time I would bitch or think this was really hard work, I would think about how much harder it was to actually be, working behind the cash register or the grill or waitressing in a Lower East Side Polish coffee shop.
Right.
And
so was that like Alphabet City? I mean, that was a tough neighborhood back then.
It was the 80s, and it was 7th Street between on Avenue A. So, yeah, it was a little bit of a gritty neighborhood.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun.
You got to be a tough girl to survive the streets of Alphabet City.
Nobody ever said I wasn't.
Well, I certainly know that.
Yeah.
So you went to film school, or?
I went to Hunter College, which was just a city university. I went there having absolutely no idea what I was going to be studying. I had taken some art classes in high school, so I knew I was a creative type of person, but I didn't even know people did film for a living. And then I got there and looked through the catalog. What am I going to take this term? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, what's this? Fundamentals of filmmaking. This is a thing. You can do this. And so I took 2 film classes and went, oh, this is amazing. I can't believe people do this for a living and get paid to do this. And so I was a film major in a city college and had no idea that I would go into marketing. That was not something that was even discussed. Trailers were not part of the curriculum there. And basically, I think the thing that I excelled at most there was editing, but I think I probably thought I'd be a director like many film students do. And got out of there and didn't have a clue about how to start. And in New York, you walk around to all the cutting rooms that are the feature cutting rooms, and you knock on doors and you're trying to get a job as an apprentice anywhere. And I had a friend from film school who had a friend who had done an internship at a place called Valken Films, which was an editorial house. And they did pretty much documentaries and industrials. You worked there for 3 months for free. And, you were a runner, which is very different than being a runner in LA with a car because you're schlepping film canisters around the pornography district of Times Square.
Right.
And this is in 1980. And so I started at Valken. I worked for 3 months for free. And while I was there was a man named Tony Silver, and he was cutting a documentary film called Style Wars, which was about graffiti and breakdancing in the 80s. It's one of the seminal films about that subject. It's in the Museum of Modern Art. And it took him forever. It was there for 3 years. He's a very precise, very meticulous kind of person who overthought things a lot.
Yeah.
So it was a big project for Valken Films. Tony had sort of two lives. He was a documentary filmmaker, and he was also a trailer maker. And he didn't have a company. It was just him, and then he would hire what he needed to do it, or he'd work out of an editorial place, a place called Cinemetrics that had editors, or this place, Valken Films. And so after my 3 months were done, and I was just waitressing now, thinking, what am I going to do now? I got a call from this man, Victor Konevsky, who ran Valken, and he said, Tony Silver has a trailer. You're out of work. Do you want to come and be an assistant on this job? He paid me $125 a week. And I went there, and the job, it was 1982, and the job was the Dead Zone.
Okay.
And Victor was going to cut it, and he was going to cut it on a Moviola upright, which is a very archaic machine, if you see it now in film, 35 millimeter film, that I had used a little bit in film school, so I knew the machine. I was not, in theory, an editor, but I had, stayed at night when I was working at Valken, like putting together Ciba-Geigy pipe videos and some, really banal things. And so when you work with Victor, he kind of mocks things up a lot, and you put them together, and then he leaves you alone, and you start editing. You get thrown into the water, basically. So I ended up co-editing the Dead Zone trailer with Victor for Tony Silver.
And Tony didn't even have a company at that point.
No, he was just Tony Silver Films. It was like a shingle, but I was like some freelancer that he was hiring. And I think he probably hired Kate Cox to be the copywriter because she lived in New York, and she probably wrote everything that I cut in the early days. And the client was this woman, Brenda Munchnick. She worked for Paramount. And this guy, I can't remember his name right now, Don Kurt. And I remember saying to him, because of course we made the trailer look different from the movie as we do. And I remember saying, wow, people are going to be so freaked out when they go to this movie. And we had fake sync and things I never even knew were happening. And he said, fuck them if they can't take a joke.
I was going to say, that's so cute. You wanted to do nice for the movie, right?
I wanted to do nice for the movie. And he was like, no, that's not what we do. And I was like, oh, I get it. So that was the first thing I cut. And then I went back and worked on some other crap for Victor, and Tony Silver got another job. And, that was some TV spots for Footloose and a trailer for a movie called Testament. It was like little piecemeal, a job here, a job there. He would get it. He thought I did good. He'd go to Victor, because I was really working for Victor, and rent me from Victor.
Okay.
And so he started to get more work, and I seemed to have some sort of natural aptitude for this. And I was cutting. It was cutting in film. In those days, you cut the trailer, and then you had to go and take your trailer or your selects and make duplicate film copies, because you weren't cutting on an Avid digitally where you could use the same shot 5 times. Everything had to it was a much slower process. You had a lot of time to think about it. You were physically cutting it up in little pieces. If you wanted to speed up a shot, you had to sit there and literally cut out frames and then retape it together to make it look faster. And then you'd have to send things to labs to get, test runs to see what does it look like if I knock out every third frame to speed it up. And the whole process took a lot more time. You had a lot more time to think about it, and then you sent it to the client. And it was just a very different kind of a pacing.
So it sounds like you jumped right on the flatbed. A lot of other guys I know sat behind other editors, like Michael Caine had so many people sit behind him for, a couple of years before they were ever able to touch film.
Yeah, because Victor was the kind of guy that basically threw you into the water. I had already cut, I guess at the same time I was pursuing documentary stuff with Victor. I cut a documentary on the history of horror films for PBS. I cut something on Ingrid Bergman for PBS. I cut some industrials for the Pantone color system. So I was doing kind of at the same time, I was doing some 16 millimeter documentary stuff and cutting for Tony when he showed up.
How similar do you find documentary cutting to trailer cutting?
Very similar, because neither of them exist.
Yeah.
They don't come with a script. You have to, it's the footage that speaks to you. So you have to make something up from nothing, and you're looking for relationships between shots that weren't necessarily planned that way. Something speaks to you and says these two things work together. So particularly if you're cutting montage in a trailer, it's, the same process that I learned in documentary was just look at the stuff as footage and go through and select it as visuals, and don't think about the context. Just think about the movement. Think about how these shots flow into each other.
Were you thinking very visually, or was it more in a dioramic sense?
I think it's both, because in a documentary you're creating a structure, and in a trailer you're looking to create a structure out of order from the movie. How do I best condense this? I think it's just very similar.
Interesting.
I think they're both very challenging. And at the same time, I had to wrestle with, do you not want to go into feature films? You're making this choice. You're putting one foot in front of another. It's not going to take you back to feature films. In New York, in that time, you really were in one, you were in commercials, you were in documentaries, you were in features.
So
I didn't even think there was a trailer business. There were maybe 3 people doing trailers in New York at the time.
Were you starting to hear about some of those guys?
I heard
the
about
Canoes and those guys?
I knew about Canoe because they were really the hot company, and so we would get TV spots on Footloose, but they got the trailer.
Okay.
And also, even then, the kind of way we were pigeonholed. So Tony was a really smart intellectual man, and so people hired him. They wanted if there's something was difficult and they were looking for an interesting, different, thoughtful solve, he was very in his head. And so we were already getting that. Like, we would get hired for Footloose to do a certain type of spot, not the fun, upbeat, young, cool spot, the spot for the parents, or, And that's sort of actually that theme for Tony. And then because I stayed with Tony 15 years, became very much what I got known for too, which is solving real problems. It's like I used to joke and think like anyone could cut The Matrix, but can you figure out how to solve a movie that can't even be talked about in a sentence because it's so complicated and no one wants to see it? Those were the movies we did a lot of work on in the early days, in my career. So basically what happened is I stayed with Tony. Little by little, he was getting busier because he developed a relationship with Orion. And I was cutting a lot of work for Orion. Something wild. Me personally cut the Platoon trailer. I won a Clio for that with Mike Kaiser. And that was really challenging because it was so full of curses and we didn't know what to do.
Right.
And, coming up with the idea to really make an all-montage trailer. And then Desperately Seeking Susan. So Orion was sort of in its heyday in New York at that time. And I was the editor of all of those trailers. And then what would happen is Tony was getting busier, so we hired another editor, and I became the supervising editor. So my career started getting, people started taking me a little bit more seriously, but still in a vacuum. You'd have people show up like, Cynthia Wick would show up from L.A. to her New York office, and we were working on Working Girl TV spots. Again, always the TV spots.
Yeah.
We wouldn't necessarily get the trailer unless it was an Orion movie or every once in a while a Paramount movie.
So they weren't multi-vending at this point?
They were multi-vending on the TV spots, but they weren't doing what they do now on
Yeah.
trailers. There weren't 6 people working on it because, well, first of all, the cost of making physical copies of the movies,
Right.
there wasn't, in those early days, they didn't have market research yet. We weren't, that was something that sort of came about. But we would have some clients from LA. I cut a trailer for the movie Chorus Line, which was a Columbia movie.
Yeah.
Different people would come to Tony from different places who we knew. Like that actually came through Steve Frankfurt, who was, I guess, a consultant who Columbia hired. Then he hired Tony because they knew each other. I mean, Tony had done some really great stuff in the past. He had done the Alien campaign, which is very famous with the brownie
Yeah.
and and the egg. So he was a super creative guy, very difficult to work for.
Tony was?
Very difficult, extremely, just had very high standards and was relentless. And we worked till 3 a.m. on a regular basis. And he, God bless him, he's passed on now, but he thought he was smarter than everyone in the room. And he was very smart. That was the thing. But trailers aren't always about selling to the smartest people. So you have to know who you're selling to.
I am so excited to share with you that Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods is now brought to you by the Golden Trailer Awards. Having just celebrated a wonderful GTA 24, there are many exciting developments we'll be able to share over the next year, including a documentary about the trailer industry that Monica Brady and Evelyn Brady Waters are producing. They shared a little bit more about that when they came on the show a couple weeks ago. They're producing it. And there's plenty of other news about the World Trailer Awards and much more. I'm just thrilled to be collaborating with such wonderful people like Monica and Evie, and I'm grateful for their support in bringing this program to you. Just make sure to stay plugged in at goldentrailer.com for all these exciting developments. That's goldentrailer.com. And now, on to our show.
So this is something I was going to ask you about. Tony, before the Ant Farm, you guys had a very simple distinction when you set up shop. You and Mike made a commitment. It's going to sound really overly simple the way I put it, but no screamers.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
it was sort of this flagpole that you were putting in the ground and saying it was an indicator of saying we're going to have a different kind of a culture than the management style that's defined a lot of this industry.
Yeah.
Was Tony of that management style?
Yeah, he was. So Tony. I mean, and then when you're with someone who's of that style, you become that style.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was a moment where there were chairs being thrown.
Oh, God.
He went through a typewriter. I mean, there was a culture of, first of all, the business was very male.
Yeah.
It was hard to get noticed as a female and to get somebody to learn your last name and treat you like you weren't just somebody's girl.
Yeah.
But Tony was a man who walked in and didn't say hello and didn't step. And I had a relationship with him, but he wasn't like people weren't like, I love Tony and I want to die for Tony.
Well, not to blow smoke up your ass, but that's how people are for you. I mean, on the client side, editors that you groomed, other producers that you mentored, so.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and,
but it's something that you called. It's something that was a priority of yours.
It was a real choice. I decided that the work was hard enough. The business is challenging enough. We needed within the world that we spent from 9 o'clock, sometimes 10 o'clock in the morning till sometimes 2 in the morning, sometimes all night. That needed to be a safe place.
Yeah,
and that the only way to nurture talent is to treat it like it's precious and treat people like they're important. And me and Mike had both worked for a lot of assholes in our business.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of, really rude, awful men.
Yeah.
Honestly. The clients could be abusive. And I think in general, the clients are way less abusive than they were in those days.
Well, some of those clients are people that came up under you.
Yeah, a lot of them are. Actually, it's weird.
Was identifying other women in the business and mentoring other women, was that a conscious decision that you made that you wanted to do this, or was it just?
No, I don't think so at all. I never was a person who went, oh, I'm looking for women. I was looking for talent. I was looking for talent, and I was looking for, people who were tenacious and just had a lot to prove. Because I think that what motivated me was not always necessarily the healthiest thing in retrospect. It was an incredible urge to prove myself.
Oh, wow.
And so I would stay there all night and do it. I just had a lot to prove. I had just an incredible drive to achieve, but I didn't necessarily know how to value myself or even have an idea of where I fit in the entire ecosphere of the trailer business. I was in New York. I didn't know anyone else who did this
Right.
except for the people that I was working with. And the world, according to Tony, was the world that I was being fed. I mean, it's a little bit like, you're a hostage because he hated LA. He didn't want to move to LA. He had contempt for a lot of it. He actually wanted to be a filmmaker. And I think he sort of kind of hated the trailer business, even though he was good at it. It wasn't like his love,
Yeah.
even though he had done some amazing work. But when people wanted to be less conceptual, he wasn't as strong at that as he was in some conceptual teaser, something really interesting. Some of the early work he did, very graphic. I mean, he had great ideas, but he wasn't always in touch with, say, what a 14-year-old kid in the suburbs wanted to see.
You had to think in terms of form and function.
Yeah, I mean, it's still marketing,
Yeah.
and you have to know your audience. And coming from where I came from, which was, a lower middle class background, growing up in Staten Island, I had a better idea.
Where in Staten Island did you grow up?
In Richmond and Victory.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I'm a West Brighton kid.
Oh, you?
Yeah,
It's
you didn't know
bizarre
that?
We don't know that. No,
Yeah.
It's really weird. So coming from that world, originally from Brooklyn, then to Staten Island, I understood who we were selling our movies to. So I had enough intellectual power to think about how to manipulate them, but then I also understood who they were. So it was a good combination, I think, for marketing and a background in film and film studies and understanding how montage works and how you can create messages by putting things together that didn't necessarily come together. So I got it, and I think he made me, honestly, I don't think I'd be as good as I think that I became if it wasn't for Tony, because it was never good enough for him. So I had to, and then if I wanted, as I grew and started to believe I know as much as him, to finally getting to the point of I know better than him, I had to always justify myself to him. And so in the justification, I learned to articulate my thinking. And the more I had to justify, the more I was able to take that exact same ability and walk into a room with a client years
Right.
later and explain why I thought what I was doing made sense.
So Tony
and be
was good.
persuasive. He was good training.
Yeah.
It was good training. So basically what happened is Paula Silver, we were in New York. We moved to a beautiful office. We were all excited. Life was great. Orion was in business.
Yeah.
We were doing She-Devil and life was all good. And then they just kept, the marketing departments just kept closing up and moving to LA.
What finally convinced Tony to go?
So, well, that's how. So then we decided maybe what we needed to do was opening an LA office. And we had a guy named Ken Hansen, who has also passed away, who worked for us at the time, who was like a real find to us because he had actually worked at Kaleidoscope under Andy Keene and Steve
Right.
Panama. And so he knew more of the real, what's going on out in LA. And he knew this guy named Andy Abrams who worked, interesting guy, but had also come up through Kaleidoscope and was working in the indie world. And he said, I'll set up your LA office and you guys can go by Coastal and go back and forth and we can try to make this work. So basically we came out, we set up this office in some like little schlubby place and Andy tried to get work and he was not great. We got some low end home video. We got some indie trailers that, that it was sort of not, and the quality wasn't up to our standards. And it was just like, I don't know what we're doing. And I would come out here to look at it. And then I'd end up like staying here and working on the whole trailer. And so I was by Coastal for a year and a half. We had a company house out here that we would share. And then Paula Silver got a job at Sony, at Columbia, and hired Mark Schmugger to be the head of creative advertising.
Oh.
And Mark was somebody that me and Tony both knew. In fact, probably one of the second or third jobs I did that weren't for Tony when I was still starting out in trailers was to do TV spots for, Mark was hired to do TV spots for Bachelor Party, a movie that Bob Israel produced. And I cut TV spots for that. So, we were getting a little bit more of a piece of what was going on out here. So Mark had moved out here and was working.
How did Paula Was he already in the business? How did Paula find Schmugger?
Schmugger had been in the business in New York, knew Tony for years.
Okay.
Worked for Merv Block in New York. I met Mark on The Last Starfighter and Bachelor Party in 83. So he was also producing trailers. Schmugger was producing trailers in the same way Tony was. They were, they weren't competing against each other, but they were both getting jobs. And then Schmugger was also a copywriter.
Okay.
And so by the time Schmugger got the job out here in 91, we had worked together for years. Tony had hired Schmugger to do producing and copywriting on a show, West Reel, we did for Paramount in 85. We had been working, there was also Vestron in New York that was big in the 80s, Dirty Dancing and all that. We did a huge show, West Reel, for Vestron, but then Vestron went out of business. So more and more the whole New York thing became difficult. And Schmugger had decided to move to L.A. Actually, I think he got a job at New Wave. And he moved to L.A. and he got a job at New Wave. I can't remember if Columbia, I think that was before Sony. And anyway, we knew Schmugger really well. I mean, really well. We were definitely good friends. And he said to me and Tony, you guys, if you want to do this, you got to move out here.
Right.
And I'm going to give you work and move out here.
Right.
So that was it. We moved out here. I mean,
That's
it was
so funny.
It was because it just wasn't working anymore. I mean, literally, I can remember like going to Show West, not knowing who any of these people were. Like they were all, these abstract names that I'd heard about, mainly from Ken or from a client. Maybe you'd meet someone like Nancy Gallagher would fly to New York and you'd meet her on one trailer you were doing for her.
Yeah.
But I didn't know them. We'd fly out and try to get work from Jim Gibbons. He was at Paramount. We'd go to Vegas and we would kind of hang out trying to attract Jim Gibbons and be like, hey, want to have lunch, give us work in New York. And we would I didn't like being not important, but I felt like we were so outside.
Right.
I really felt like everybody out here was like some mythological character that I'd heard about but didn't know.
Kind of like Barbara Glazer was when I first started my career.
Thank you. Thank you. So basically I guess it was 91, we just moved and it was really just me and Tony, Andy Solomon, who,
Andy was already with you.
Andy was with us in New York.
Was he must have been a baby.
He was an assistant editor. He wasn't an editor yet. He started when he was 18 as an intern on the Vestron show West Reel in 89. And this guy, Nick Goodman, and I think that was it.
Yeah, Nick, he's still cutting.
Yeah, he still cuts. And so we just moved out here and had this, office on La Brea when nobody was on La Brea and La Brea wasn't cool yet. And there were like 3 things on it. And we ended up getting a lot of work from Columbia because of Mark.
Was it already Silver Glazer at that point?
It was, yeah. It was. I think it went from Tony Silver and Associates to Silver Glazer Films. And by this time, honestly, Tony was kind of doing nothing much. I mean, he would come in, he'd have an opinion, he would be difficult, he'd be argumentative. I was definitely the person running it. Like by the time in New York when we left, before things started to go downhill, we probably had 17 people in the office, and Arit was working for us.
Oh, yeah.
And so we had different freelance editors working for us, and we were working on, good movies. We weren't necessarily winning. Sometimes we did, but we definitely were getting a lot of like Merchant Ivory movies.
Okay.
We got smart movies.
Good.
And somehow, I have no idea how we got into Disney, but, I started doing a little bit more work for Disney, for Oren Aviv and
I was going to say, Oren was already there, yeah.
For Oren Aviv and Peter A.D.
Yeah.
We were doing work, some work for Jim Gibbons at Paramount when they were doing all those female thriller, movies and stuff. So we were okay. Like
Jim probably really responded to. Didn't Jim start out as an editor?
Yeah, Jim was an editor, and Jim had his own company called Flamingo Films. No, I don't think he responded to me quite. I mean, we got along good. We liked each other. But it was like, there were so many people, and there were so many talented people. And I wanted to try to raise the profile of the company. And we worked for Sella. He was at Fox, but he wasn't the top guy yet. I mean, I started to meet all these people and figure out who's who and where did we fit and what was this industry and, who do I like? And there were a couple of clients I really hit it off with that I felt were really supportive and responded to me, like Oren, like Peter. And obviously the people at Sony. At the time when we moved out here, the first thing we did, one of the first things we did was a show Westfield for 91. Josh Goldstein was an intern.
Oh, wow.
Joe Nimzicki was there. It was,
Joe Nimzicki, yeah.
And so Tony was pulling back more and more. He wasn't around that much. His wife still lived in New York. He also spent a lot of time in San Francisco with friends, doing other projects. And I thought that I could try to increase the profile of the company. Meanwhile, some people had come after me. Schmugger had wanted me to actually run what was like kind of his slave company for Sony, which was called then, and with Joel Johnston, he wanted me to run that. And
Okay.
I was like, I'm finally getting to a place where people are starting to know me a little bit. I don't want to just work for one company. So then they started JG Films with Albert started it.
Jacobs and Gerber, yeah.
It later became Creative Domain. So I was meeting all these people and it was so interesting. And I thought, okay, I'm going to increase the profile of this company. I'm going to hire some good people. And I could not get people to come work for Tony Silver, basically. It was just really difficult to bring people in there. And he was not nice.
Yeah.
And he was just difficult to be with. And it was making me bitchy. And I was not nice back to him. And at a certain point, I went, I don't want to be this person. I don't want this to be my life. I was in a good place in my relationship. And I felt like I wanted my life to be better. And I wanted it to have, it sounds cliche, but I wanted my life to be filled with pleasantries during the day. And so I decided I was going to start looking for a new partner.
So I was going to ask
Tony.
you that. Yeah. So whose idea was it? I mean, you and Mike obviously were the founders, but it's Tony. Tony Silver was still, you were with Tony. Mike was with...
He was with Bill, and I joined him with Bill Carroll. But actually, let me just give you a little quick how I got there. So Tony tried to, and wanted me to buy the company.
Okay.
And he wanted a ridiculous amount of money that I didn't have. And I said, that's ridiculous. And I got some advice from some clients who gave me advice. And I went, okay, I just have to believe that this business is my business, not Tony's.
The value of the business had to have been basically you.
Right. I said, what are you selling me? You're selling me myself. I don't understand. And he said, you're wrong, and you'll see, and you think it's all about you, and you're going to find out you're wrong. We know that's not true. So how that worked out.
That must have been great motivation, though.
It was also hard. We'd been together 15 years. It was difficult. So I called up, the first person I called up was Bob Israel. And he said, and I had lunch with him, and he said, yeah, our clients are too similar. You do a lot of Sony, you do a lot of Disney, you're sort of doing a lot of, romantic comedy. I do that. I don't think you could add anything. I love you, but I don't think you can add anything, because we liked each other. Then I called, or maybe he was the second, and I called Tim Knapp, because I liked him and we knew each other because we worked on similar projects. We both knew Chris Pooler really well and Ray Idiaga. Tim was a trailer park. It was a trailer park.
He already started trailer park?
He had already started trailer park. And I called him up and he said, can't do that because we just brought someone in who turned out to be Benny.
Oh.
Then I called Craig Murray.
Okay.
And Craig Murray said, I just did this thing with Tom Kennedy.
The CMP West thing.
Yeah, CMP West thing. And I went, okay. And so then I was talking to Jim Frederick, who was thinking maybe he wanted to be a vendor, until I went over the economics of the entire thing down to buying Christmas presents for your clients. And he went, I don't want to do this. And he said, do you know Mike Greenfeld? And I said, I've seen him around, walking around Vegas at Show West with John Bloom, but I don't really know him.
Yeah.
And I called him up and we had lunch and we went, I have this client. He went, I have this client. I went, it was like we had a little bit of Paramount each. I had this one, he had that one. And we went, this could work. I had heard that Bill Carroll was trying to get out and that Mike was looking to buy out Bill. It turned out not to really be accurate. And I have to apologize in that when I talk about starting the FM, I don't mention Bill because that was became a very difficult situation for all of us. So I decided to join Mike. He was a Carol Greenfeld and the company was going to become a new company. They had maybe 10 people. It was going to become the Ant Farm. And I said, no matter what, we can't be in the Valley. No matter what, my dog has to go to work. We couldn't find a place. My dog couldn't go to work. The beginning
these
of the
things are non-negotiable,
these things
right?
are but they turned out to be. And the beginning of the company was extremely difficult. I went home every day and cried. It was terrible.
Why?
Because we had a different work ethic. I had a different way of looking at things than Bill Carroll did. It didn't work. It was not a good partnership.
Okay. So it wasn't necessarily Mike. It was
No.
Okay.
I barely knew Mike, and I will say that by going through what we had to go through, which was almost dissolving the company 2 years in. Me and Mike got very close to each other. But we started the company. There were 10 people there. I basically underpromised and overdelivered. In 12 days, no, in 3 weeks, I had 12 jobs. But I didn't have any of my people. They didn't have the infrastructure I was used to from Silver Glazer. They didn't have a music department. They had a guy in a boombox. They didn't have fiber. It was just a joke. It was it was in such disarray, quite honestly. And it was in Burbank, and I lived in Venice. But my clients showed up for me like it was unbelievable. Or Aviv, New Line. At the time, I did a lot of work for New Line. And people, I didn't even know I had relationships with Tom Kennedy, who's also passed. I asked him for lunch. He showed up with a job and gave me,
When he was at MGM?
At MGM.
Yeah.
And I just really got a lot of work really quickly. And I had to work with all these people that worked for Mike that I didn't know. There was a couple of freelancers that I had brought over from Silver Glazer, but I couldn't bring my people. I couldn't bring Andy yet. I couldn't bring Wink, who was my writer. And, so like Andy would come at night after he'd work all day at Silver Glazer and secretly work on a trailer for me because.
Oh, so it wasn't even a thing yet.
No, it wasn't a thing yet. It was just like, oh my God. It was like, who am I working with? How am I getting this done? But we did. We hired the right people. We had so much work so quickly. We started looking for people. Art Mondrella was one of the first people that we hired when it was the Ant Farm, who was amazing.
Where did Art come from?
He was a freelancer that Mike knew, I think, because Mike had run the in-house at
For
Universal.
For
and
David
I think
Samet.
that's where he knew Art from. So Mike had been around more. He knew more people, but we just put the word out. People talk and get you other people. But it was just like, it was like a bootstrap company. It was just like, you know how to do graphics? Like you've done one graphic in your life. You're the graphics department.
Right,
It was really, we were just so overwhelmed. I had so much work suddenly. And Mike was getting work from Dave at Samet, so at DreamWorks. And, we just basically, the Ant Farm went from 10 or 11 people to 160 in 5 years.
Wow.
And we had, over a series of, those first 5 years, we had 4 different offices. We just kept moving until we ended up at the Grove. We were in Burbank. We had 2 offices in Burbank. Then we had Wilshire Courtyard. Then we went to Sycamore.
Yeah.
And then we went to thing. And always the idea was, we're going to have a good time doing this. Once we got through the Bill thing and we bought Bill out and he left, it was
really your company.
It really felt like it was mine and Mike's company. And the clients were happy with the work. And I think a big success for us and really for me was The Sixth Sense, because I got that movie. I mean, Oren was giving me movies, and Disney had a lot more movies then.
Yeah.
But no one thought The Sixth Sense was going to be a huge success. So it was kind of like no one even knew what it was.
And that was M. Night's first film?
It was M. Night's first film. And so Art cut this amazing trailer. We worked on this trailer. It was fabulous. We had great producers. Everyone worked together in such a great way. And the trailer was great. And when they saw it, they realized that the movie was going to be great. And basically, it was a huge success. And it changed, I think, a little bit our relationship with Disney. So they really were a huge client. I mean, we really got great movies from them. It was when Oren was there, and Jim and Dave. It was those days, and they were really great days for us. But, Massey really showed up, and, I think people looked at me and they were like, oh, she's a woman. I'm going to give her all my romantic comedies. And in those days, people still made romantic comedies.
Right.
But the truth was, I also was like, if you had a big movie, but you wanted it to have depth and heart, they also thought I would be good at it because I was a woman. It was all this, all right, I'll use this. This will work for me, so I can be the woman. But, there was just a way, I think, that we got a reputation, the movies that I worked on with my team, because me and Mike didn't really work on the same movies. Every once in a while, Jim Gibbons would make us work on something together, but for the most part, we had our own projects. A lot of them were about giving some real weight and some real heart and trying to find a different way to tell a story, I think is kind of what I became known for, and being tenacious and not letting go.
One of the coolest things about doing this program is I get to collaborate with friends of mine, not just friends, but friends who are the best at what they do, like my pal Brent Allen Hagel, trailer VO Brent. Brent, how you doing, man?
Wonderful, Corey. And I think, critics and audiences would agree to that.
So do trailer VO guys always talk that way, or do you ever break character?
Would never break character. Cocktail parties, they say, hey, can you do the voice thing for us while they all drink a beer?
Do you do the voice thing while you're drinking a beer?
I've never tried. I could probably win an award for that.
Oh, see, you're already breaking character, man. If we go on too long, you're going to start sounding like Gilbert Gottfried or something.
It'll be like this. Hey, yeah, it was the podcast that did it to me. Even.
All right. So before we hit it, we get back to the show. How can folks find you?
BrentAllenHagel.com, Brent, Allen, Hagel, Hagel.com on the interwebs and social media at Trailer VO Brent on social media.
It's a great follow. Thanks, Brent, and thanks for helping out. And now back to our show.
By that time, you already had some really talented producers, really talented editors.
Mm-hmm. I like to say that we were like, the Yankees. It was like we had all-stars.
Yeah.
And some of them got brought up there, like Jennifer Horvath.
How did you find Horvath?
There was a writer named John Maritato who basically recommended that she come to me. He thought she was like a young Barbara Glazer and sent her to me.
And she was barely more than an assistant editor by the time she got to you, right?
Yeah, she was just starting to cut.
So you got to tell me the story. She tells a story about how she got onto Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that story?
I can't really remember how she got on it.
The way she'll have to correct me if I'm wrong about this, but the way she tells it is she went into you, she hadn't done anything.
She was probably editing some like reels and stuff, like, or television promos or something.
And she tells a story like she went to you one night and she said, I'm going to stay here tonight on my own time and just let me cut it. And you can tell me how it sucks tomorrow, but if you tell me why it sucks, I'll try it again. And like she came to you. She really loved the filmmaker. She loved Lord of the Rings, and she felt like she could learn from you.
She was that person. I mean, she's an unbelievable success story, and we worked really well together because, Jen in the beginning may not have been as great as she is now with structure, but man, she could put shots together like nobody. And I could sit there and talk about structure, and she could, while you're just talking about it, it's just coming together. And Lord of the Rings really, I think, really changed everything because what happened with that is like I had a really good relationships with the people at New Line. They knew me. And I think that, I've always said that something that happened for me is that male clients didn't feel threatened by me and I was very human and they became more human. And I had a really, I don't know, I feel like the luckiest woman in the world in that I just had great relationships with my clients. There were one or two people whose names I will not mention that were not dealable, like, refused to work with or worked with once or twice because I had to and just like life isn't long enough for this. Like, I'm not doing this. But for the most part, I had great relationships. And so what happened is that Peter Jackson was very unhappy with Joe Nimzicki, who was the president of marketing at the time at New Line.
New Line, yeah.
And he basically demanded that he wanted to work directly with a vendor. And so they were like, who's a vendor that we can hire that he will like and relate to and we can trust that she's not going to go behind our back and try to make it about her relationship with him, that she is going to learn she knows how to walk the line. And I guess they thought that I was a trustworthy person who would look out for their interests, be diplomatic, and kind of walk that line. And so they sent me, and I brought Julian, who was my print guy, Julian Hills, and Steve Harris. I can't remember if I brought Jen to the first one or not. I don't think so. To go to New Zealand and meet with Peter.
Oh.
And I had actually, it's a whole nother story, but I'd actually been there 2 weeks before on a vacation and gotten engaged in New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
So I got in a ring in New Zealand and then 2 weeks later got called to go to New Zealand. And I hadn't even ever read Lord of the Rings. So I'm like, doing the cliff notes and all of that. And we went there and won over Peter. And that basically became a 3 film project. That was an amazing experience for all of us because we got to go to New Zealand. We got to work with Peter. Then we sent our editors, which were Jen and Steve, over to New Zealand.
So that was on the first one?
That was on the first one.
Okay.
And then it just continued. And on the second one, And he would show us stuff that he wouldn't show New Line yet. So I was walking the line. And by that time, Russell Schwartz had taken over. So he inherited me, and that worked. And Laura was there. It was just all good. And, I got a special thank you on the film, on the second film.
That's got to be cool.
Which was very cool. So that was, I don't even know what year Lord of the Rings was, but, we started the Ant Farm in 97. By 2002, after we had bought out Bill, me and Mike were sort of like, how are we ever going to get out of this business? Because if you leave or I leave, we're sort of screwing the other. So we need to have an exit plan. So we decided to try to sell the company. So in 2002, we actually sold the Ant Farm to DDB, which was an Omnicom company.
I didn't realize it was that early.
It was really early. It was 5 years in.
So the only other ones I know about off the top of my head were Bob and Ron, who sold Aspect at that point, but nobody else had sold.
Well, Seinecker had sold and then bought it back.
Right.
But that was it, just Bob and Ron. They were the only ones who had sold.
So did you get advice from them on what to do, what not to do?
No, I definitely did not have the relationship at that point where I felt like, first of all, you can't tell anyone trying to sell your company. That is, you got to be so careful about how you do that. And if your people find out or your clients find out. And so I think we did it very smartly in terms of we sold it. We thought they'd tell us we had to stay for 5 years. They said we only had to stay for 3. We did stay for 5.
That's what I think made it a successful transaction, is because you guys were the stewards of the company for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Bob and Ron, I think they both got out pretty quickly after the sale.
Can't really remember what they did. They obviously had it a lot longer than we had it when they sold it.
But the other thing that was different than some other companies that had sold, now Bob and Ron had some guys that had got Rob and Steve, but you had Amanda, Andy, Rod, Maria.
Right. Maria had already left. So when
Sheila
in the
already
middle
went
of trying to sell the company, Maria, literally in the middle of we're in the process of doing our spiel to these prospective buyers. Maria announces that she's going to Universal. I was actually in New York at a reunion from that company, Valken, that I had started it as an intern. And I was devastated. It was first of all, we just sold them that you're the future. So she left really early. She left in 2002, which is crazy to think about. She's been at Universal a long time.
I didn't realize, yeah.
But Rod and Amanda were really the people who were producing. And Rod really was working mostly on my movies, really had taken over. I always knew when to come in and when to play the Barbara card and when to, but when to leave him alone with them. So, and we had a couple of editors too, but it's oh, Quentin's coming in, I'll show up for that, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they were really strong, people. They were working directly with the clients. So we sold it in 2002 and we actually left in 2007, which is a long time ago already.
Long time.
So we were actually only at the Ant Farm for 10 years.
When did you start Picturehead?
So that's what's so crazy. So Picturehead, which is a post-production company that was really started just to do post-production on marketing materials, we started that. It's 20 years old now.
Oh, wow.
So, and we started it with competitors, other people.
I was going to say, how does that conversation happen? Craig Murray, Tim Nett, Ron and Giacomo.
Yeah, it happens because... And interestingly enough, with the exception of Bob, all the same people that I first approached when I was looking for a partner, because I also approached Ron and Giacomo. I tried to get Ron and Giacomo to move out here. They were my first choice, move out here, let's do this, because we knew each other.
Yeah.
And I was like, you don't know, it's good out here. Come.
Yeah.
They weren't buying it. And so basically, me and Tim had a great relationship. We liked each other. And we were in Vegas and at Show West. And so Tim is like, I got this idea. None of us liked the way New Wave was finishing the stuff we were doing.
And they had all the finishing at that point, right?
Well, they had Disney and they had Sony.
Yeah.
Actually, Access Post was doing Sony. They were doing Fox and they were doing Disney.
Okay.
New Wave. And we were me and Tim were both very large Disney vendors. And we'd get we'd see something that we had worked on and it would be missing a sound effect. And we were like... this sucks, and we don't think that they're finishing this well. And I think Disney was having issues sort of with them, but mainly we had still control over our home video finishing.
Okay.
And so, but not enough home video to warrant your own finishing in your house, in your own company. So we thought, what if we just did this? It's unheard of. And we had these clandestine meetings, and, the only rule was none of us would be stealing people from other people. which was good. And it made it harder for you
did, yeah,
when
yeah,
you
yeah.
were trying to steal people from one of us to
That's
sell
right.
to the other one.
Right.
But we just had this rule, and it was really fun to talk to people because, I'd only worked with Tony Silver and then with Mike. Like, to be able to talk to other people who do this work was so, it was like having, oh, wow, you feel that way too? That's
Right.
great. So it was really fun. But, we weren't running the company. It was like we hired people to run it.
Yeah.
And 4 years into it, we felt strong enough as a company to go after the Disney account, which we did. And we got it. And it's, who knew at the time that if there was one account to get, Disney was the one to get, what it was
Right.
going to grow into. Because obviously that's still, one of our biggest clients. And Picturehead has basically, over the years, it is a marketing finishing company, and many of the relationships come from our relationships. And now we finish for Netflix, for Annapurna, for STX, for Lionsgate, and a lot of those relationships can be traced back to relationships that we have. But the people there, the reason I think they're so good at finishing is because it started by creative people who honor the creative. And that's always been the thing. And when I was doing some consulting for Disney and DreamWorks after, after I'd left the ant farm and was feeling like I didn't exist anymore and I needed to prove to the world that I still existed.
Right.
I tried to do some consulting, but I got to do the finishing. It was a Disney job, so I finished it at Picturehead. So that was fun because I got to see how my own company actually works.
Yeah.
And, Picturehead, meanwhile, is, we also, whatever, we ended up growing into a larger company that has other areas in sound design and picture finishing and television and feature films. We don't run that on a day-to-day basis, but we were able to use what we learned as business people and, quite honestly, the money we made selling our company to be able to focus a little bit more on what just made good business sense, as opposed to being the people in the edit bay on the fiber till 3 a.m. Because, quite honestly, by the time I left the AMFM, I couldn't take one more minute of it. Of the work.
Yeah.
I was done. I don't think I was done forever, which is why I went back and did some creative, consulting. But I was burnt out. I mean, I was working till 1 o'clock in the morning on a regular basis. If you're working on a movie like Spanglish, which is unmarketable, you're just every day you're cutting another trailer. And so is Aspect, and so is this one. And then you're combining your trailer with their trailer, and coming in the next day and they're saying, well, that didn't work. We went to test it and it didn't work. Try again. And it got to be very difficult to be a human being and be in that business.
Yet there was an old saw that Barbara goes out to lunch with clients for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, in addition to all the work.
Yeah.
So did that make it a little bit, make your days a little bit longer?
Well, my attitude, I didn't do breakfast, lunch, and dinner because I actually hated breakfast because I had to exercise. But sometimes, and Barbara still does do a lot of, lunches and dinners.
But you're like a relationship person.
That's really important to me. And my attitude about my clients was find something to relate to and something to like about every one of them. If you can relate to them as human beings, then all of this is going to be a lot easier and a lot more fun and a lot more gratifying. And people are going to have a much harder time screaming at you if you're a human being to them. And so, as I said, I feel like I had the best relationships in the world. And I still, go out with these very same people. I lunched last week with Peter A.D. We don't have any work to do together anymore.
But there's also a lot of clients now, creative executives now that, they see you as a friend, but they also see you as a mentor of sorts.
Yeah, that's somehow I become the wise old lady.
Stop.
I don't know how that happened exactly. I think because people think that I've been around enough and believe that the advice I give them, I have no ulterior motive. And so I try, even when I do have an ulterior motive, because I do have a business too, I'm honest about my ulterior motive, but I think they think that I stand behind, if I am selling Picturehead, that I stand behind it. So there's that. But I think they also think that I ran my life and my career with a level of dignity and respect. And so that's who I am. I've sort of owned that reputation now. That's, who I am. And I'm honest. I'm brutally honest, trying not to be cruel. And I like having become this person. And I feel like I went to war with these people. That's the way I look at it. I go, like I was in the trenches, and there's a relationship, having lived through that is very particular. And then in my day when I came up, the people at the studio were not creatives. They were studio execs.
So many of them came up as editors themselves.
Well, now, but not the way it was like when I started. Someone like Mike Kaiser, they might have been copywriters or creatives, but they never sat in an edit bay and edited. Now you're getting people like Rod, people like Amanda, people like Maria, people like Mike Jones, people, all over the place.
Yeah.
Who, I think it kind of, maybe one of the first people was Tommy Galgada, people who were really doing the work. And that actually made it harder for vendors, because now the people who you have to please, they know what's in the meat. They know that some of it's actually pink sauce. It's like you can't pull one over on them. And they also had too much knowledge about pricing.
Oh.
The curtain came up. That was actually not a good thing. If you were a vendor, it wasn't a good thing when your people that worked for you went to the other side. It was good in that they might give you work, but something changed in the business that made the people on the other side much more able to frame fuck, because they actually knew how to frame fuck.
Yeah.
And so I think it was annoying.
But they couldn't get away with that with you, could they?
Oh, I mean.
To the extent that you let them.
Let's put it this way. Well, first of all, Maria's smart, and I liked working with Maria.
Sure.
But it was definitely interesting when she first went over there. I mean, we're probably closer friends now than we were when she left the Ant Farm and went over to Universal. But it's kind of hard when the person who worked for you is now telling you what to do,
right?
And then, even the clients, like, say, Dave Singer or Jim, now the people under them are starting to be my clients. So,
right.
For me, it gets harder and harder for some 20-year-old on the fiber to be telling me what to do. And, Jim Gibbons once told me he could see my eyes rolling over the fiber. You get like, I'm being told somebody who's 10 years old what to do. And it gets harder. You get like, really? So that's the hard thing about the business is how do you keep enthusiastic as you age and as the clients become younger than you, and as you've done it 150,000 times, to keep reinventing it, to still get excited by the work. And I think the secret is to actually take some time in between to recharge yourself.
So I want to ask you about something I know you're really excited about. A bunch of your friends from the trailer industry have gotten behind an organization called A Place Called Home.
Thank you. That's very sweet to bring that up.
How did you get involved in A Place Called Home, and what is it all about?
Wow. So I'm actually the board chair.
Mazel tov.
That's the problem with me, is I somehow come in and then take control. So one of the problems with working in the trailer business when I did it, and I think still to this day, is it's so all-encompassing. And my life became so focused on that it didn't have a lot of balance. And when I left the Ant Farm and I was trying to figure out, like, who am I going to be now in the world, I thought, well, I want to do something that's useful and good and give back. And I made money. And so people get invited to galas, which basically means your client is being honored and you're going to come and buy a table because you have to. And over the years, I'd go to many different ones. And the ones for A Place Called Home really stuck out for me and really spoke to me because the kids were there and you got to hear the actual stories. And Bob Israel and Mark Schmugger's wife, Louise, and actually Dawn Tobin, who I didn't know well, but I knew a bit, were both on the board of A Place Called Home. And so I knew a little bit more about, like, it felt a little less intimidating. But Bob Israel was going to be honored. And so he asked me if I would, because I have the other thing I tried really hard to do was have good relationships with the other vendors. Like, I liked that we were all in this together. So I had good relationships with vendors, good relationships with people in the industry. And he asked me to call on his behalf to try to raise money for him being honored, like to get people to buy tables. And I said, I'm not going to do that unless I know what this organization is more. So I'm going to go down there. I'm going to take a tour. I'm going to talk to the executive director, Jonathan Zeichner. I'm going to find out more about the organization. I did that. The minute I walked in there, I was like, oh my God, this place is amazing. Maybe I want to do this. And then I was I was really scared. What does it mean to join a board? One of the things and I did join, and one of the things that being part of the board means is trying to find those other people to be honored. And that is a struggle because basically we have gone very into the well over the years in creative advertising to find people to honor, to basically, try to get the people in movie marketing to show up and spend money on their behalf, on the behalf of the organization. And what I'm hoping is that I have managed to show people enough that they care about the organization, not just doing it because somebody's being honored that they care about, and that when I run out of people to honor, which could actually be this year, by the way, that they'll still show up for the organization. And when you go to a gala for a place called home, it is filled with people from the marketing community, and it's really a lovely feeling. I just hope that I can sustain that without having, this year's honoree in my back pocket, that they actually show up for the organization and not just, for David Samuth or Josh Goldstein or Frank Kioki or Adam Fogelson, because that's what we've been doing over the years, and I'm running out. So
You'd like to think that the organization itself has its own merit. So what does the organization do?
the organization works with at-risk youth and their families in South Central. It started 25 years ago. It was really in the beginning just about safety, get these kids off the streets. It was a reaction to the riots down in LA in South Central. A woman, Deborah Constance, just wanted to get these kids, a lot of them really either in gangs or in danger of being pulled into gangs, off the street and give them a safe haven. Over the years, it evolved as a full academic, arts, nutrition, computer science, digital science. We have 4 gardens. It's
the gardens, yeah.
It's a full wraparound program to basically expose kids who would never be exposed to anything like this in their lives, to offer them opportunities to develop so that they can go to college. We have graduated something like 380 kids from college, most of them first in their family to ever go to college. There is a lovely couple who has given, I think it's like $4.5 million over the last 17 years in college scholarship money. And we wrap around those kids. We support them the whole time they're in college to make it, because it's a big deal to go from the world that they live in to all of a sudden college in Maine.
Yeah.
So we really wrap around them. We have a vocational program now too, because not everyone should go to college. We have a high school that is a separate charter school that is in our space that we work with for the most at-risk kids, foster kids, homeless kids, kids who have really been thrown out of the system. So we're basically, we serve about, 1,000 kids all in all, but some of them are away in college. So I think the number is something like 600 kids a day that come in and out of of our facility. We have 2 campuses across the street from each other. We will be growing again. In the near future, there's going to be an announcement, and we're going to be growing again, trying to raise a big chunk of money because we have over 450 kids on our waiting list, and that's just awful. We give out free food. We give out thousands of dollars of free food every week. Every day we give groceries. We do community outreach. We're a polling place. We're working with people, to understand the politics in their neighborhood, to try to prepare to gentrification in the neighborhood. So it's a pretty all-inclusive program.
Congratulations. It sounds like it's really grown even since I've become
it has.
with
It has. Yeah.
Bob is the first. And then the next year you called me and I realized, oh, wow, and Melissa Palazzo.
Yeah, Melissa's on it now too. Yeah.
So a couple more questions.
Okay.
If you had, I'm sure it's not just one thing, secret to success.
Mm.
So if a kid in film school is really a trailer geek or wants to be a teaser god or what have you.
I think that learning, if you have the aptitude to edit, start putting shots together with music. Just play with the visuals, just get in there. Like I always tell people, if you want to be an editor, the first thing you should just do is take some movie that you love, cut it up into 1 million pieces, and try to just cut visuals together to tell some story. But I think the secret to success is being tenacious. It's about not letting go and, just keep on keeping on. Like you just don't give up and listen. You really have to listen. I think, the mistake that people make is they want to defend their work instead of listening to what is being said. So, I would see a trailer that another vendor cut. And so many people are just like, their first reaction, if they were also working on it, was like, well, that sucks. And I'm always like, that was interesting. Wow, why didn't I think of that? So I think it's about really being responsive.
By the way, I remember there was a Key Art Award. You came up and you guys got, it was Chicago.
Oh.
I think Archer was on it.
Yeah, Archer
But
was
you
on
spent your entire speech talking about Mojo.
Yeah.
Because you had gotten,
we had gotten a piece. We had gotten a piece from them, and it was amazing, and it was a great start. And I think, to acknowledge the other talented people who are part of this process.
Yeah.
Whether it's your client, or another vendor, and just constantly be learning and observing. I think it's like life. It's no different than life, quite honestly.
So that impulse that Jen Horvath had when she came into you and said, I'll stay here on my own time, and I know it's going to suck, but tell me why it sucks. And
exactly.
That was the...
I think that just not taking no for an answer when, someone tells you you're not good enough, you have to keep actually getting better. You can't just say, no, I'm good. You have to prove that you're good.
Have you arrived yet?
Have I arrived? Do I actually think I'm good? For a million years I thought, oh God, one day they're going to pull the curtain and see that this has all been a scam
It's
and
an
I don't know what
illusion.
I'm doing. It's an illusion, And what's interesting is when you actually have open, real conversations with people, you find out how many people think the same thing.
Right.
Or this is a dress rehearsal. It's not the real thing yet. I'm not involved. And then I don't know when the moment was, but there was really a day where suddenly I woke up and went, not only do you know what you're doing, you're really damn good at this.
Right.
And that feeling is really great. Unfortunately for me, sometimes I think the only thing I'm good at is that, I know how to do that, and I know how to do it really well, and I know how to be in this business really well. And I think, unfortunately, the secret to success in life is to learn how to do some other things too. So,
well, you were an accomplished creative, but then you were learning how to be the owner of a big business and how to be a business person.
And I think I learned how to be a business person by accident. I mean, I'm still with a spreadsheet, but I think also for me, the luckiest thing that happened to me is I have amazing partners. I mean, to have gotten through 20 years of Picturehead, really, Craig and Mike and Tim, I'm like the luckiest woman in the world. I have the best partners. And now Craig has exited Picturehead this just last August, but, we're still friends. But, me and Mike have been in business together for a long time. We've gone through a lot together. And we've gone through a lot together, all of us at Picturehead as well. And I think surrounding yourself with people you trust and learning to trust people.
They're good people.
Oh, they're good people.
Yeah. So one last question.
Mm-hmm.
We've lost a few people in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned Andy Keene. We mentioned Anthony. Is there anybody in particular that's passed that you like to remember?
No, and I actually, as I feel bad that these people have gone, these were not people of my world or that I cared for. Because for me, there was a sort of male bullying, as we talked about. I was disregarded, and certain people, when I was starting to get more powerful through the Ant Farm, people like Anthony were not nice to me, or Bob Farina, or Steve Panamar. They were like, who's that chick and where'd she come from?
Right.
And I think sometimes the fact that nobody saw me coming is what enabled me to basically sneak up and become as strong as I did.
Yeah.
But really for me, I'm sad that Tom Kennedy, he was a nice man, that he's gone. And as I mentioned, this is so long ago, with somebody that I loved, Ken Hansen, who really taught me a lot about who's who and what. And unfortunately, he passed really early on. And now I look back to Tony Silver, and we did reconcile. It took
nice.
10 years for him to say, you were right. It was always about the people. You always said it was about the people, and I didn't understand it was about the people. I thought it was all about me.
Yeah.
And that's, so.
Well, that's interesting.
It was an interesting thing to actually go through that.
Well, somebody who graced the halls here quite a bit, Don LaFontaine.
Oh, Don. Yeah. Just that there were characters. There were, it was a world unto its own, and it was a very particular world, and very special for sure.
Yeah.
And I love recently, I don't know, last year I was walking my dog and I ran into Brenda Munchnick, who literally was my first client on the Dead Zone. And, her grandson now works for me at Picturehead, which I
It's
love.
hilarious.
Yeah, and I love that. And I just, I like that sense of connectiveness
Yeah.
that is all there. I think it's, a pretty wonderful thing that people stay connected. And I try to stay really connected to the people that I knew and the people who came up. And as you know, the Ant Farm went out of business this year.
Yeah.
And it was heartbreaking for
Yeah.
me. It really was heartbreaking.
But, there's so many people from the Ant Farm that are having such a major impact
yeah,
on the business as a whole.
it's true.
So
it's true.
it goes on.
Yeah, it goes on. Exactly.
Well, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah.